The question of whether or not to tear down statues of American historical figures is being increasingly asked. As the United States becomes more progressive and aware of civil rights, many are asking whether we should keep the statues erected years ago of Americans in our past whose actions don't align with our changing views. Many of these protesters raise valid points. It doesn't seem to benefit our nation in any way to have memorials or statues dedicated to Confederate soldiers who seceded from the country. Furthermore, many people whose ancestors, who have been subject to the oppression of these individuals, may find statues that commemorate slave owners offensive and insensitive. However, there's rarely only one side to any story. Today, I'm going to be discussing the context of many of these situations by talking about one person in American history who's been growing more and more controversial every year, President Andrew Jackson. In late June of this year, 4 men were charged with destruction of federal property after allegedly trying to take down a statue of our 7th president. The event has been met with ambivalence. Many protesters lauded the men for trying to tear down the statues, while others fustigated them. In this video, I'm going to be talking about who Andrew Jackson was and why he's being met with such strong sentiments. Andrew Jackson was born in the Waxhaws region of the Carolinas in 1767. He grew up with little formal education and went on to work as a prosecuting attorney in an area that would later become the state of Tennessee. Jackson rose from his humble beginnings and was elected to the House of Representatives in 1796, the first man from Tennessee to do so. Shortly after his term ended in 1797, he was elected to the U.S. Senate for a year. He soon became very well off, building a mansion and purchasing many slaves to take care of his new estate. The peak of his life thus far was when he was chosen to head the state militia and served as a major general in the War of 1812 against Britain. By the end of the war, he was seen as a hero, and his status in American political society grew. This newfound popularity encouraged him to run for president, and he was successfully elected in 1828. The Jackson administration, which lasted 8 years, would be known for the many great things it did for the nation, but also for the very negative impact it had on the country. Old Hickory, as Andrew Jackson was often called, was generally referred to as the first common man to be elected president, as he didn't grow up a member of the elitist class. A populist, Jackson spent much of his presidency trying to better the lives of Americans and improve conditions for those at the bottom and middle of the social structure. Jackson would later be identified as a member of the Democratic Party, a party which focused heavily on states' rights in the early 1800s. During his time as president, he opposed the development of a national bank, yet increased the power of the federal government. In fact, Andrew Jackson is often considered to be one of the presidents in United States history that had the biggest impact on the growth of the federal government. He increased the usage of the presidential veto and was a champion of democracy. His belief in democracy was so strong that it gave birth to the term Jacksonian democracy. President Jackson extended suffrage to most white men over the age of 21 and believed that people should have a stronger say in the government. Upon leaving the White House in 1837, he had created a formidable United States government that would last for centuries and was even more popular than when he had arrived in 1829. However, Andrew Jackson's presidency does not end at his strive for democracy. There is another side to the Jackson administration, one that many both today and in the 19th century view to be shameful. As I mentioned earlier, Jackson was a slaveholder, and although fighting fervently for the rights of man, these rights did not extend to the roughly 2 million slaves in the country at the time. Jackson opposed policies that would outlaw slavery in Western territories as the United States expanded, and banned anti-slavery tracts that abolitionists sent to the South. However, his record on slavery is often still overshadowed by the Trail of Tears, the darkest chapter of Jackson's presidency. As the concept of manifest destiny became increasingly popular as the United States started moving westward, the United States government had to deal with the issue of the Native Americans already living on that land. The solution that Andrew Jackson came up with was the forced relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans off of their homelands in what would be known as the Trail of Tears. The natives were forced to walk thousands of miles away from their land as white Americans came with their families and settled upon it. During this time, thousands of Native Americans died and lost many parts of their culture and identity. The Trail of Tears, which lasted from the 1830s to the 1850s, sparked controversy that will last all the way until today. However, this isn't the first time Andrew Jackson has been a controversial figure. Earlier on in his career in the military, a heated debate arose in Washington after General Jackson ordered an invasion of Florida, an invasion which the Spanish colonists vehemently opposed. Andrew Jackson was also subject to the first presidential assassination attempt, in which Robert Lawrence, an unemployed house painter, shot a round from 2 guns at Jackson as he left a congressional funeral, though both guns misfired, which spared President Jackson's life. Experts now say that the odds of 2 perfectly good guns misfiring twice are about 125,000 to 1, which is a shame for Lawrence because shortly after that happened, President Jackson beat him with his walking cane. Today, Andrew Jackson's legacy is still controversial. Some, rightly so, see Jackson as a man that strengthened our government and made our country more democratic. He also serves as an example of how someone can rise from humble beginnings and achieve success all through being a public servant to the nation. However, many say that Andrew Jackson has one of the most sinister track records on equality, actively fighting against the rights and well-being of both African slaves and Native Americans. Both of these opinions are correct. However, the question we are asking is, how are we going to remember President Andrew Jackson? This is a tricky question because it doesn't have a right or a wrong answer. Most Americans would unanimously agree that President Lincoln deserves a statue, but someone like Nathan Bedford Forrest doesn't deserve one. In order to determine whether or not someone should have a statue, however, I think we need to first identify whether or not we want to be the type of country that memorializes the notable figures in our country's history. We need to understand that creating a statue for a person doesn't make that person any better, just like tearing down a statue of a person doesn't erase their history. I myself don't take a particular side on this issue. You might be wondering yourself whether it's right or wrong, but the truth is, there's no one way to answer that question. It's very difficult to draw a line to determine exactly how good or how bad someone has to be to deserve a statue. My fundamental belief is that whether you want to erect a statue or tear one down, I'll support you, as long as you have a complete understanding of the history behind that statue and the ability to answer the simple question of why.